give it up for Scott Wilson. First, I mean, this is really all about you. So what I'd like to do is just start out with, tell us where you grew up. What kinds of things were you thinking and doing as a kid? And I guess, was there, a moment in time when you thought, wow, I could do this? Or, whether it's being a designer or whether it's being an entrepreneur or what have you.
Right, sure. Hey, everyone. So rewind. I was born in Washington, D.C., and grew up in the metropolitan D.C., Virginia, Maryland area. Just kind of a regular childhood in the 70s. My father was studied architect, went to school at Syracuse University, but he ended up doing graphic design, being an illustrator and a photographer and a fine artist. So it's kind of interesting because I kind of assumed that if you were an artist or a creative, you just did all those mediums equally as good, because he was equally as good across all of them. So I was like, oh, okay, if you're a designer, you can just do any kind of design, which definitely has influenced kind of the way I approach design. I'm kind of fearless in trying a lot of different things. But he had, he had an industrial design magazine laying around the house when I was growing up, because they were starting industrial design as a profession in an area of study at Syracuse in the 50s, and he was intrigued by that, but it was kind of kept an eye on that. I was always I think the first book he bought me when I was my first big boy book, I think I call it, was called Rapid Viz, which was really about capturing your ideas as quickly and easily with the maximum amount of impact with the minimum amount of strokes, and there's all these sound bites in that book, and still I think it's on its who knows, 4th, 5th publication now, but that really taught me how to draw in a bunch of different ways and communicate ideas. So all through school I was always drawing, I was the kid in class, I was always drawing, and I think in high, other than that I was playing baseball, playing sports, doing everything, But I'd like to tear apart things and figure out how they worked, So there was this kind of left, right brain kind of thing going on. In high school, my guidance counselor wanted me to be an engineer, or thought I should be an engineer, and my art teacher thought I should be an illustrator, or
So you decided to combine the two?
Yeah, it was there was no education back there or guidance on that was a field you could go into. So luckily, I kind of knew through my father that was an actual profession you could go into. So, and it was kind of that balance, which I tend to like.
So just a little diversion, I guess, here. You mentioned baseball.
Yeah.
You were pretty good at baseball.
Good enough to play competitively all the way through, even now, but I kind of realized in high school there was another pitcher that got drafted right out of high school, and he was just unhittable, right? And I was like, okay, that's a professional athlete, right? But I still play. And it keeps me. It's the one time that I can actually step away from work and not think about work.
Yeah.
It's when I'm on the field, trying not to get hurt, and there's interesting analogies and correlations between a pitcher in baseball that's your one-on-one strategy with keeping the hitter off balance, but yet you have a whole team behind you. So there's this interesting analogy with work where you kind of do brainstorms as a team, but then you got to go back and do focused work and figure out the problem. So I like that kind of dynamic that's in baseball, which is kind of rare in sport, right?
I guess I never really thought about it. It's almost like baseball is a single or one-on-one sport with a team.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love it. Yeah.
So I know you actually went to college for industrial design. Is that right?
Yep.
So where did you go to school, and how was your experience there? And I guess how did that lead into your sort of working life?
Yeah, there wasn't many options in 1987, so I'm dating myself, for industrial design and baseball. It was Arizona State, which my father said, you're not going there because you'll fail out immediately with all the partying, and didn't trust me. University of Cincinnati, which has an amazing internship program, which we hire a lot of people from University of Cincinnati. And then Rochester Institute of Technology, which was Division III, but it had a better work or a better scholastic athletic kind of balance where you didn't, in D1 you have to be on the road all the time and studies kind of suffer. So I ended up going D3 and going to Rochester Institute of Technology and up in the
So you played
Arctic
baseball.
Circle almost.
You fulfilled all your loves at one place.
Yeah, it was a good balance. Yeah, for sure.
That's very cool. Now, speaking of balance, taking a look at your career,
Yeah.
it's interesting because it's almost exactly 50-50 where you were sort of working for the man, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and 50% starting up your own companies.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of, and I think working for other companies, most of that time was at IDEO, and I think Nike, yeah. So tell us about that. And what I'm trying to get at is kind of the comparison between, particularly being a designer,
Right.
the comparison between working at a big company versus starting up your own thing. So let's start with, working for the man, and how did you get into IDEO and other companies?
Yeah, I mean, it had a really interesting path back in the 90s where I was switching jobs every year and a half, which back then was like, don't do that, But I kind of would switch jobs when I hit a learning plateau, and there was some other, I was even considering going back to school, but then another job opportunity would, come up, so I ended up doing that. But I kind of did the back and forth thing between consulting and corporate every other year and a half, from a small consultancy in upstate New York to Thompson Consumer Electronics in Indianapolis, where Philippe Stark, who nobody knew was, at that point, he was 38 years old, and he was our creative director. And then, I had the option to go to France and work with him, or come up to Chicago and help start the design group at IDEO in '95. And, and then corporate Fortune brands and then back to IDEO.
That's right by my house, by the way.
Yeah, Lincoln made that terrible commute. Coincidentally, and when I moved to Chicago, I set up shop, or my loft, living in 212 Sagamon, across the street from my current office. So completely different neighborhood back then. But they had some nice restaurants, but it was rough. That was 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, 20 years ago. Wow,
that's crazy. But and then I came back to IDEO a second time, and then that's when I figured I wanted to go to Nike and learn how the big brand worked. But I think the difference is, everything was a different learning plateau for me, right? And it was like, coming to Chicago, I learned a lot about user-centered design and IDEO's multidisciplinary process, and all the different disciplines and working together in collaboration. And so it was really great foundational kind of experience for me, and a variety of projects as well. Consulting is all about breadth, and IDEO went pretty deep, but in corporate you go super deep, and I am always a advocate of keeping that diversity and staying cross-train, almost like cross-training, like make sure you're getting a variety and not getting stuck in one silo. That's how you get lazy. You don't do that. You don't do one exercise when you go to the gym, right? So I think, working for the man was interesting, in corporate and consulting. I think it's completely different. And I think it's invaluable that you get both experiences. And the reason I left Chicago and went to Nike was this opportunity to balance performance-based design with lifestyle and understand how the big brand spoke to the consumer around narrative and storytelling. Whereas I learned foundational design here, it was very functional and user-centered. It wasn't really the marketing and narrative side, which Nike is a master of. So going out there and learning that at Nike was amazing. And I ended up working for the man, Mark Parker, who's the CEO of Nike, which for 3 years was probably the best, working for the man experience I've had. The guy is probably one of the best CEOs in the world. He's kind of a designer by background, which he's kind of got that right brain and consumer connection, and that really flipped the switch, because my role there was to look for new opportunities, new partnerships, and new technologies for the Nike brands, and incubate those and find inline homes for them. And so that flipped the whole entrepreneurial switch. And then
I'm just curious. Does Nike, or did your boss, I guess, whatever, realize that? In the process of sort of laying the groundwork for your entrepreneurship, did he fully expect at some point that you would just kind of
I don't know. I mean, I think Nike has the ability to keep lifers there, but they're getting so big now where they're having a little bit more of a churn. But unbelievable growth for a company that's in their industry. But I think they've done great things to reinvent footwear, whether you're talking about welded technology or Flyknit, and they have this thing. It's called Nike Explorer is my group, and then they have the Kitchen, which is all about. It's like a designer playground. There's really no other company that has that kind of like freedom to experiment, and it's pretty amazing. Actually.
And I'm curious, like with athletes and such. I mean, do you guys have an opportunity to engage with them and understand and sort of create and build a story around?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely starts with the user or the athlete. Nike's models a lot of times create the aspirational, performance, top of pyramid kind of product that eventually either the posers or the aspirational people buy into, or they buy a takedown version of it that's not watered down necessarily, but defeatured or doesn't have all the special sauce. And eventually that innovative special sauce filters down to the masses, and they come up with something new, right? So it's a classic formula.
Yeah. So how did you sort of transition out of Nike to start up your own thing?
Well, it was kind of a family decision. My wife's family's from North Shore here, and we had our second daughter was kind of on the way, and I knew that my time was up. I promised 3 years out there, and it was going on 6. So I was come back to Chicago, be near the grandparents, and then the support structure, and at that point I was like, I'm either going back to IDEO a third time, which they all bet I would come back, and I'm like, I can't go back, or do my own thing, which I didn't think I was ready to do, or at that point I left Nike. I was doing a lot of wearable technology, but it was early days of wearable technology, and they were an apparel company trying to sell technology, or a technology group within trying to sell embedded, apparel, and it was like it just wasn't working. It was too early. Like they were ahead of it. And Motorola was actually an ingredient, like an enabler brand that was actually building the technology in a lot of it, or Convest that we did for the ACG brand, or was it Oakley or Burton snowboard jacket. Those things were like 2006 and before, right? So super early. Yeah. So I came back to actually work with Motorola and run the wearables group. From a design standpoint, we had a lot of cool partnerships that were forming, but unfortunately, I got back, bought a place, and 2 weeks before I started, the guy who was instrumental in setting up all those relationships with all these collaborative brands went to a different team, and then the new guy came and started shutting down all those relationships, and I was like, man, I didn't get a chance to do it. So I ended up sticking around for a year and doing some cool stuff, but at the end of the day, it wasn't what I came for.
So then that was kind of, I guess, ultimately Motorola, the ultimate impetus for you to go out on your own?
Yeah, I mean, some jobs teach you what not to do. And
Motorola's pretty good at that.
Yeah. No, it's great.
Nobody from Motorola here?
I mean, the problem is I fall in love with brand's potential. Sometimes they don't realize it, and it's just one of those things. It was 6 months into my stay at Motorola, they announced the iPhone, and they were in complete denial for 6 months, and I was just like, the morale in the studio was down, and the day the iPhone launched, I just went down to Michigan Ave and grabbed it and went to Filter up in Bucktown Coffee Shop and started Minimal. So it was kind of
wow.
Yeah,
that's literally how it started?
Yeah, it was June 29th. It was the day the iPhone came out. I was like, I'm out of here. Coincided with some other things I was struggling with, but yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Now, so let's talk about that moment in time. I mean, that's extraordinary. So,
and
was
no recession coming on, right?
Oh yeah, right, that thing. I mean, did you have anybody else at that stage going with you?
I was kind of freaking out, but my wife knew I was miserable. And she's like, you went from a workaholic, who I didn't know you were, because when I met her, I was basically taking kind of a sabbatical in between IDEO and what I wanted to do next. And I was just playing baseball, going to baseball games all summer, and then I ran out of money and I had to go back to work. So she was like, I thought I married this guy that was fun and was around all the time, and then all of a sudden became this workaholic. I was like, no, just in between. But I think, what was the question again? Sorry.
No, it was, I mean, just that moment in time, like, so the iPhone comes out June 29th, you go to Filter.
Yeah, I was kind of freaking out because I was like, I had no plan. She just knew I was miserable, and she's like, well, just go for it. You'll be fine. You know, you've got these amazing. Even though you jumped around a lot in the past, you worked your ass off every time you were in those spots. So all these people will probably come to you.
Yeah.
So we already had booked a vacation down Sanibel Island in Florida, and I was just kind of freaking out by the pool and the beach, trying to figure out who am I going to call because I got I've got mortgage to pay and kids to put in school, and it's not cheap to put kids through school here in Chicago.
No, it's not.
So it was interesting. I got one of my former colleagues at Nike had gone to Microsoft, and he called me with this panicked because he just started a job and inherited this terrible, how would you say it, terrible project from an outside consultant, and he's like, I know you can fix this. So it was probably shouldn't talk about how awesome it was, but it was literally, I did 2 weeks worth of work to save the day after they spent $750,000 on this project with an outside other design firm, and I didn't know what to charge them, right? So I was like, I think I spent $14,000 worth of time on this nonstop around the clock, and then I was like, bill them $40,000, It's like
Sounds good.
And then I got a call from my former colleague. He goes, Scott, you can't bill it. I got your invoice. And I was like, you can't bill us that. And I'm like, oh shit. And he goes, he put a sizable amount of money. It's like, you got to bill us that. And it's like, because it will make everybody look bad if you only bill us this much.
Oh my God.
So that kind of
I thought
I've never been that profitable since. So one guy, and it's like, damn, I just made more money than I ever made.
So that was literally, that's extraordinary. Yeah, I mean,
so then I was able to go get the spot right next to Google and get a studio, hire a couple people. It was great. So
wow, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
So
working hard and not burning bridges is a pretty good deal.
That's a great deal. So you do that, get some nice cash flow going, I guess. What's the first thing you do? So you get the
Serendipity,
space.
that's great. It happens.
Love serendipity.
What is that
Unfortunately,
Thomas
I live by
Jefferson quote? Like, the funny thing about luck is the harder I work, the more I have of it. So there's a very big truth to that, right? So.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. Yeah. So you get the space and everything, but you've got to start building out a team, right? Or is it just you going solo?
It was kind of, again, luck in some ways. Like, I had a baby furniture company that I started while I was at Nike because I had a baby and I just was not.
Wait. You started a baby furniture company?
You
You just glossed over that. Sorry.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, it's like 2003, my daughter was born. I was like, everything. We were renovating our house in the hills of Portland, and everything was terrible on the market. It was all so disposable, and it's like, God, there's got to be a better way. So I kind of pieced together a supply chain of bent wood manufacturer down in North Carolina, steel rod welding up in Rockford, Illinois, soft goods out in LA, bits and pieces from all over, and launched a bassinet with some partners, and actually did the design, engineered it in August, got tooling, everything developed, and JPMA safety certifications, which is no easy thing to do, hindsight, and then actually started shipping. Turn that off. Anyways, I started shipping in January 1, which is I don't think I could repeat that.
Wow.
But and then we were just selling online direct, and this was back in 2004-05, which was pre design blogs and everything like that. But I think Mocha Loco picked it up, and then all the baby boutiques wanted it. So it was kind of a fun little.
That's extraordinary. I have to ask you this question too, and I thought about this the other day when we met. Is your ability to design? Do you look at it sometimes as a gift or a curse? It's almost like you could go through each and every product, around the room and say, man, I could do that better.
Yeah, this is kind of definitely. The more experience I get across more industries and materials and processes, and with more connections to vendors, it does create a certain anxiety because you want to fix everything. On the other side, my eyesight's going, so it's a Gaussian blur across everything, so I don't notice as much anymore. So there's kind of.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So we'll get to one of the products too. I want to ask you about it, but so I know Charles Adler. He's a co-founder of Kickstarter that lives here in Chicago. He's been a guest at Startup Grind, and I think Kickstarter launched, I want to say 2009ish or something like that. 2008.
The actual business or the actual service, I think it was like 8 or 9. Yeah.
Was it? So I want you to tell a story. I mean, it's just extraordinary to me. And if you think the baby bassinet story is extraordinary, just tell us about, well, you know what I'm getting to. Why don't you just tell us a story around Lunatic and TikTok and how all that came about?
I am so sorry about that. Turn this thing
That's
off.
that's your Lunatic in your pocket.
It's actually off. I don't know what it's doing. But anyways, Rewind 2010. So I'm exiting my second partnership, second product hardware, which was a combining what I learned in Nike ID customization and trying to make mass customization work at Nike was part of my project with Mark Parker, and kind of that's in the back of the mind. I'm looking at the emergence of cell phones and cell phone cases and figuring out how to take white goods and then do one-off mass customization and print it all in St. Louis and next to UPS and get it to people very quickly. So pretty much architected that whole business and launched it. 7 months into it, partnership fell apart, differences of opinion, and it happens, right? It's like most marriages fall apart. So anyways, exited that, and anytime you exit a partnership, even if you sell your company, there's, buyers or sellers remorse and, postpartum kind of depression. So I was pretty down, and, I tend to do really good work when I'm in a bad mood or depressed. I don't know what that is. And that's my, that's where I escape, right? So I think I was kind of fiddling around with a design that would, and teaching myself SolidWorks, which is a CAD program. And I was like, well, I'll design a cool case for the Apple Nano to turn into the watch. And then I was just dabbling around, making prototypes and seeing things with a partner, and I literally went out to dinner with my wife, and she said, no more startups for 6 months until after spring break, and this was like November, right? Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, and I signed this drink napkin, like no more startups until. And then I'm like, yeah, but I had this idea for this thing that turns a Nano into a watch, and she's like, that's stupid, that's geeky, nobody wants that. And I'm like, well, I want to put it on this thing called Kickstarter, and I pull that up, and I'm like, I show her, and she's like, well, that looks like a bunch of artists raising like $5,000. If that makes you feel better, about the whole breakup, then fine, go do that. So I put together this. I went in on a Sunday, and actually the guys in the studio are like, why are you wasting your time on that? We're making real money over here. It's like one of my former designers sat across me. He's like, I'm making real money working for Microsoft here. And so I went in on a Sunday. I had some previous conversations with Gina, who's in the audience here, and she'd been working for Bruce Mao and massive change stuff, and she was a high school classmate of my wife's, and so we had a couple dinners and chats about her coming in and handling PR and all the stuff I don't have time for because I want to be busy doing the work, not doing the PR, which is, I think I drive her crazy, never being available for PR or things like this. And I was like, oh, Wednesday I'm going to launch this thing on Kickstarter, and maybe you can help field some calls if there are any. And so I went in on Sunday, and I had a little point and shoot camera on a tripod with server noise in the background, and it's horrible video, but I guess it's authentic. And I just did a little pitch and just threw together some of the video and some of the pans across the products and prototypes, and threw together this thing and put it live on Kickstarter. Told one editor at Fast Company, and then it was like took off. It was like $80,000 the first day, and then $1 million in like 30 days. So I was like, uh-oh. I was like, I got another business on my hands.
So it begs the question.
Yeah.
What did your wife say about it?
She's used to it. I think I owe her big time at some point. Yeah.
That's extraordinary. But you kept, I mean, you did that though, and you kept, I mean, Lunatic.
It was a fun time though. It was
yeah.
literally like a high point in my career because it was just like, it meant a lot because it was like, for once, because a lot of people always question like, well, is it design or is it supply chain or the brand that's driving this demand, right? Because it's hard to quantify and separate design from those things. You design something for Nike, a lot of times it's going to sell like crazy. But this was a singular designer with an idea. Retailers had already told me they had no interest in it. You know, Apple Store said nobody's going to pay $50 or more for that. You know, other brands like Incase were like, nah, we're going to do our own. And so it was quite interesting to see with nothing behind me. That,
Yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate
validation.
validation.
Yeah.
$1 million worth.
Yeah, there's nothing, you know, there's focus group, all this kind of, you know, I mean, most marketing people and sales guys want to, you know, not be held accountable, so they can always say the focus group told us to do that, right? You know, so I think you know, nothing more validating than you know, a bunch of people putting their credit cards down for something that doesn't exist. Right?
Yeah,
So
of course, yeah.
of course, the water's been tainted these days, but
Yeah. But you did keep the, I guess, sort of the entity Lunatic around, right? So you guys are you doing anything with that at this point? Or?
Yeah, we're still doing stuff. I mean, it's a long story. I mean, it's definitely part of a book. You know, you always learn what not to do. You know, and this thing was definitely, it's been highs and lows, and yeah, I mean, we've had, you know, multi-billion-dollar company offer us tens of millions of dollars for this thing, and then you go through 7 months of M&A process, and then they back out at the last second before the holidays, and you're like, oh my God, you know, what am I going to do now? And then you get in some other partnerships, because then you need a partner because you've kind of like, you know, lost your focus over 7 months, and then you know, and again, partners are bad, or not always good, and so finding the right. So went through a year of the wrong partner there, and just exited that partnership and replaced it with a different partner, and we've got high hopes, and things are looking very positive now. So we'll see what happens.
So you're still with that partner?
Yeah, I'm still, you know, and I love the idea of partners. That's a problem. It's
Yeah.
like, I like to work with people, but at the end of the day, partners are tough. You know.
Oh, it's very tough.
Yeah.
But, you know, and it's almost statistically, if you're
Yeah.
a startup, to have a co-founder, I mean, the
Yeah,
odds
I mean,
of succeeding are much greater.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I've always loved the idea of that, but it's kind of tough. So.
So where do you sort of go from here? I mean, that was, you know, minimal, TikTok. Now you've done any number of products. Well, how do you decide what to do? Like, what's sort of your inspiration? Is it all serendipity and you just kind of choose, or what how do you choose who you're going to work with?
We just hired our first business development person full-time in April. We've really done word of mouth and prior relationships for a long time, and we're starting to, you know, a lot of those relationships have now built up design groups within internally. So the biggest threat and competition for design agencies and firms is probably internal design groups now, because a lot of people are building up internal, which they should. We tend to like do good work for them and become a great recruiting tool. Our work becomes a great recruiting tool for the Microsofts, Dells of the world, so they hire, you know, build pretty strong internal groups. So we're on to the next, you know, we're dating again, I guess you would say, you know, so there's it's different, right? You know, you had this trust in the first 5-6 years of minimal, and now you're dating again, and yeah, it's so now that we have a business development person, you know, we're starting to maybe more proactively target some stuff. I mean, there's a balance of like picking up the phone versus, you know, going after some. But you know, there's, you know, you're trying to match inspiring projects with, you know, the passions of the people in the studio and what they are interested in working with.
I mean, how difficult is it to find the right client or partner or what have you that will sort of give you the freedom to come back with whatever you want, even if it's not, you know, they're not kind of pigeonholing you in any way?
It's every single relationship is completely different, right? And I'm starting to use an analogy. You're getting married in Vegas, and you're not sure what you're gonna, you know, what kind of relationship. So you have to go on a bunch of those dates, and sometimes it's like a 3-month kind of, you know, a lot of our engagements are 2 to 3 months, like 60 to 90 day kind of sprint. Sometimes we go a lot longer, but and you find out whether you're compatible, both people and, it's not always about, we tend to look at projects, if we take it on, we kind of are interested in the space, but then you find out whether or not you're compatible with the people, and I think the relationships are way more important to us than the actual project. And the respect, it's always about mutual respect, right? So you don't want to look at you as a service, like, selling hours and, as a service. You want to see for all the, for us, I mean, you look at our website, like, it's consistently great design, but, there's a lot more substance and stuff that's not really tangible or visible around those great results, because we know synergistic relationships with, like, supply chain or with this technology, and we connect the dots, and that's a lot of times what informs the product.
How do you differentiate, like, going back to the Nike example or whomever, pick a client that you have, how much of it is great design, and how do you measure this? Like, how much of it is great design, the fact they already have this distribution, manufacturing network that gets it into showrooms and store shelves and so on?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you define design. Unfortunately, design's been kind of minimized to this kind of what it looks like, right, over the years. But I think other people, a lot of people understand the, the importance of, like, design, big D, or whatever you want to call it, where it consider, I think, you can sell consumers on products that look good at first glance and they buy it, but if it doesn't have a lot more substance to it behind it and thoughtfulness, that actually the relationship gets better over time, they don't fall in love with it. It doesn't create brand equity and brand love. And so I think when we do our job right, which we try to do, is like we define the problem that we're trying to solve and then solve it. And then the design typically comes later, because if you've got a great brief and a great product definition, it kind of designs itself. I mean, not to minimize what we do, because then we can wrap it up as well or better than anyone, but it's like, but it is, I've always been a firm believer in form follows function, even though it's overused and everything, but I mean, and seems pretty German, but it works. It's a formula that works if you want to build a brand and build loyal followers, as a brand. So I don't know. Nike can market anything, and
that's what I was getting at.
And they can sell a lot, but it's like, I think the ones that do the best are the ones that are sustainable and people keep buying. Like the Air Force One still sells millions and millions of pairs of shoes, and it was designed in like 1983, right?
Right.
So,
it's probably resurging now.
Started off as a performance shoe, right?
Yeah.
It's funny how performance shoes of yesterday end up becoming the lifestyle shoes of today, right? Whether Chuck Taylors or Air Force One.
So I don't know if you want to share the story, but I'm going to make you share it. So you told me about the crock pot. Can we talk about the crock pot?
I don't know if we can talk about that.
No, we can't talk about the crock pot.
Yeah.
All right, we'll skip the crock pot.
Slow cooking, yeah. I mean, it's a big trend, and we're working with the Jordan brand and doing some cool stuff, and it's under the radar right now. But we love taking old brands that created category. They were category creators, right? And we love taking those and making them relevant again. There's nothing better than taking a brand that resonated emotionally and rationally with the consumer at some point and just trying to unlock that again and make it relevant again.
Yeah.
So some brands just get stuck, doing the same thing, and they kind of lose their way. So.
Yeah, and I guess that was part of my question, was the brand kind of allowing you to just do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be critical up front.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, do you have to define that ahead of time?
No, I mean, we have a pretty senior team that's super hands-on. Our director of engineering was, at Abbott Labs, so doing medical products, so he understands hardcore engineering. So a lot of everything else is fairly, nothing's easy, but it's fairly good. Our head of brand is, former Nike, Fallon, Leo Burnett, DDB, CK guy, so he's got a lot of experience, but he's still super hands-on. And when you have that kind of experience in the mix, and a lot of young, passionate guys in the mix as well, and girls, and diverse, like we have Slovenia, France, Taiwan, Germany, India now. So we have a multicultural.
That's interesting. I mean, is that I hate to say this, by design, or I mean, that kind of diversity feeds, I don't know, maybe different perspective on things?
It's not really by design, but it's just best idea wins and the best talent wins, right? So it's just we choose the interns that come to us, and luckily we've gotten to a point where we have a reputation where people from Europe and elsewhere want to come and work with us. But I was getting, your earlier question about the kind of, if it's not well defined by client doesn't know what he wants, something where they know generally kind of this zone. We're completely, because of our experience in the mix of people, we're pretty good with the fuzzy front end where not really sure, let's kind of like go do some research and try to connect the dots and kind of define what this user proposition is and put a story around it and get everybody in the room nodding and agreeing, and that's super important. When we first started Nike Explorer, we were doing stuff in a vacuum, and it was stellar work, but we weren't including the inline business units from Nike Tennis or and then it was like not invented here, even at Nike. As soon as we started bringing them along in the field, observing the user, because Nike had a consumer research group, which was classic, user quantitative, user research, but not in the field, in the environment. And the results were coming back, and the answers were coming back 180 degrees different. So once we had those guys in the process, then they felt like they're part of the creation, and the adoption rate was much higher, right? So
yeah. So how do you, going back to like your team, and you mentioned interns and all that, what's your selection process? Like if somebody here, there probably is, I'm gonna guess 20 that would want to work for you. Describe that process.
Well, when I started Minimal, there was a lot of reasons behind that. Actually, it was do you want to hear the story behind that? Logo?
Yes, I do.
So logo you see there is reduction. It's kind of got rid of the vowels, merged the letters. It was actually a gift I was given to this guy Magnus at Nike, who was leaving Nike to start his own clothing brand. He was a Swedish guy, loved minimal clothing. So I was going away party at the bar. I slid him that logo. I was like, hey, happy going away. Here's your logo for your company. And then he went on a cross country trip with his wife in Winnebago or something, and then came back and took a job with Commerce, one of our subsidiaries. So I was like, I'm taking that back. so we thought about different names, but ultimately ended with Minimal. And I think Minimal had a lot of meaning, both aesthetically, but also just the whole saying of like reduce everything down to its essential ingredients, and I think that that informed, and also after being at IDEO and a bunch of other places where these are amazing firms, but it's like I want to be super nimble and super small, and I created a network of really top talent of research and user experience from the guy that I hired, that we hired for Nike ID back in the day, or Nike Plus back in the day. And these guys are all external now, so I was like, we can be small and nimble when we're only doing what we do, like industrial design in the beginning. But I can always, instead of hiring a head of research, I could partner with the best guy I know, because I'd still be wanting to work with him even if I hired the best person I know.
Right.
So that we were operating with that kind of expand the team when necessary and go back, because I didn't want to like turn away jobs that just didn't fill all the disciplines at that time.
It's almost like the movie industry.
Yeah, basically, you're right. Yeah, actually, what's his name? The guy who did the Minority Report. God, forget his name, but took the studio. I took my studio at Nike down there for an offsite. McDowell, Andy McDowell, I think. And he was doing the terminal with Tom Hanks at the time, and he showed us their whole model, how that industry works, and how they pull that specialist in as needed. And I was like, that's interesting. But back to how do you pick people? Like, so to be nimble, you want like someone that is super good at their core competency in trade, but then they have extra talents, right, or aptitude for extra. Other fields. So that's kind of how we operate. We always look for somebody that has, something else to offer.
Plays the
some
clarinet.
special
Yeah.
talent, right?
Yeah.
We've got quite a few multi-talented people in the mix.
That's very cool.
And so or interests.
So what's ahead for Minimal? And what's ahead for Scott?
I don't know. I was in Mexico trying to figure that out for 2 weeks, and I don't know. I mean, you kind of get to these crossroads, and we're at this point right now where we're at like 22 people-ish here, and a few people in San Francisco just to be in the mix out there.
And we're trying to recraft our story right now because people look at us because like maybe they're look at all the beautiful products online and go, "This is a classic industrial design firm," but you don't get that consistency by luck, and we're creating brands that are almost like a brand incubator, brand creator, company creator, but then we're also doing the consulting stuff as well. Passionate about both, but the way you get these kind of unbelievably cool user experiences is that there's a lot of components. There's design, there's engineering, there's brand, there's storytelling, there's supply chain sometimes. So you fill in these gaps for these companies where needed. Sometimes you fill them all in. So we need to recraft our message. We tend to, if you think about, we tend to give both corporate. We try to, we enable big companies to act small, I guess, and a lot of them want to be like startups and be more nimble. And CEOs want that, so we try to do that for them. But then we also take these startups, which have come to us with nothing but an idea or a provisional patent, and if we believe in them, we package them all up in like 60 to 90 days, and they look like a real company, and fortify their IP, expand portfolio, brand, product, engineering, digital. So in 90 days, you've got a company that looks totally legit, like a big company.
So it's almost like a product accelerator.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I go to these kind of Highway 1 kind of demo days, and it's interesting to see, like, out of like, a couple of them ago, like maybe their second or third one, they had like 16 companies. 2 of them took design seriously, and he had bags of money in the room. Just tripping over the bags of money with Kosla and Kleiner and all those guys. And then I kind of got up on the catwalk after the presentations, and I looked at where the concentration of money was, and it was around the 2 tables that were set up that the 2 people that took design, 2 companies that took design seriously, and everybody else was like, "When are you going to come visit me?" So, and both those guys closed rounds totaling $15 million by the end of the afternoon. So it was crazy. Right? Wow. It was like 6, and the other one was like 8.5 or something. Wow. But it's crazy. It was pretty cool. So it was kind of obvious that these other guys were waiting to invest in design until later, when they got their seed or after. These other guys kind of did it legit, and like you end up using a student or or a friend, and on the cheap.
Yeah. But
in the end, it becomes ultimately more expensive if you don't use somebody that knows how to get you. Because we help companies raise money all the time, or sell, unfortunately. We have to figure out that formula, how we can be part of the exit on some of these big companies.
Well, we'll help you out with that.
These guys sold for $260 million shortly after we did this. This is the Misfit wearable Ray, which was the second generation to their Shine, which was that little disc. And we turned this around in 6 months from start to finish, and then Fossil bought them for $260 million. We've kind of done that.
You just need a small sliver of that, really.
Yeah.
You don't need a big one. No. Yeah. Anyways, why don't we open it up for questions?
Well, I missed out on the funny thing. I was like, it's not funny at all. I kept the email. I'm going to frame it. Nabil Hyatt from Spark Capital. I met him way back in the Nike days when he was doing these ambient devices, which were these glowing globes that kind of signaled stock market changes and stuff like that. Way ahead, right? And then he ended up doing Zynga and all this other stuff and did Spark Capital. And I remember I was dealing with a family emergency down in South Carolina, and I get this call from Nabil, and he goes, "Hey, Scott," he's like, "I got this company, and have you ever done virtual reality?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I did something back in like literally 1991 for this Forte Industries, and I did a couple other ones, and they're like, they never really pan out." But I was like, "Nabil, I'm in the middle of a family crisis. I'll call you back." And I'm really good about calling back, and I didn't call him back. And guess what company that was?
Oculus.
And he was like, he's saying, "We don't have a lot of money, so it'd have to be what's the equity thing?" And I'm like, "It was Oculus." I was like, "Whoops."
So that's
wow. Yeah.
Extraordinary.
0.5%.
So that's not going to happen again, right?
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
So everything is meant to happen for a reason, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that one was yet.
I guess so. Anyway, why don't we open it up for questions? I'm sure there's got to be questions here. Yeah.
What's your one thing for branding for young startups?
For branding, you got to get your story right, the narrative. So, like, you may have a great product and beginnings of a story, and we've whether it was like Ulo the wine, it was like Ulo came in. I don't know if you saw that wine sulfite wine filtering product that we did. So James, very smart PhD chemist out of Northwestern, created this powder that extracts sulfites out of wine, which a lot of people are sensitive to wine and sulfites. And he came in with a, it was actually, he got it designed and it was not bad. It was called Soul Fighter. And I'm like, isn't that a game I used to play to cut people's heads off when I was a kid? But I mean, it was like, he did the right thing, but it wasn't really about, sulfites. It was really about returning wine back to its natural state as if you opened the bottle at the vineyard, right? And so it was a wine purifier. But it's so important to get that when your first impression with a consumer, your first entry in the market is ultra important these days because so much competition, a lot of the same ideas going, and sometimes the best idea doesn't win. It's the one that tells the best story. You see that all the time.
Yeah, definitely.
So I find someone that is a master storyteller, and once you get the story right, then the branding, everything is informed by the story, really, when it comes down to it, because it is the ingredient. I mean, it's the ingredients that you can build the product semantics off of. You can build the brand identity off of. If you just start sketching product designs and logos around letter forms or whatever it may be, it's like that's kind of the way young designers start. They're just happy to be doing it. It's like, I'm just happy to be doing design. It's like,
I think you just defined Fiverr, one of our sponsors.
And then once you get the experience and you're thinking about it as a more senior designer or creative director, you're thinking about it in the car, in the shower, you're flying, you're connecting the dots, and then that story falls into place, right? So not all designers can tell stories. We actually did not to get off on a tangent, but one of the best classes we ever did at Nike was bring in this woman who did storytelling class for high potential designers, like 15 of us at Nike, and it was so awesome that we ended up rolling it out to all of them because it just makes everybody's life easier if you can communicate, what that design is about, what the inspiration was. And,
that's brilliant.
So it was unbelievable. And I hate taking public speaking classes. I'm not a good public speaker. I like the more informal thing, but this thing was awesome. It was about setting up the different structures of the story and how you can tell it and get people on. And I was like, my project was, because then you had to do a project and you had to do it in I forget how fast it had to be, 2-minute pitch, right? And at that time, Adidas had just launched the Worm Drive Adidas One shoe that had and they kind of leapfrogged us, and we'd been doing this stuff on the back burner, but not prioritizing it. So my pitch was, the first slide was the three exclamation points, like the Adidas logo, and then the next slide was a big bite out of the waffle iron, the Bill Bowerman waffle iron. Like they just took a bite out of our innovation equity, right? And that's so it's a stakes kind of story. It was like, this is a high stakes thing that these guys just did. So that's when Nike Plus, came off the back burner, and we kind of did the partnership with Apple. And it's like, wow,
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
Questions?
Otherwise, as a designer or engineer, you end up getting too much in the details and geeking out.
Yeah.
So what are the 3 things that startups can learn from big companies like Nike? 3 things.
3 things. Oh, that's a good question. Well, Nike is a design-driven company, right? So if you're not serious about design today, I mean, it's going to be really hard to, create a sustainable business and something that consumers care about. I mean, good or bad, Nike and Apple have raised the bar around consumer expectations, and there's no going back, right? Everything's compared to that. So you have to take design seriously. Nike is, design-focused, design-led company, design CEO, right? Very few companies like that. I'd say number 2. Number 2. What did I say? Story. They're a master at whether they have the best product of the year or something they're not quite there. They tell a great story and they have confidence. So I think confidence is important in your storytelling, getting everybody on the same page, because unfortunately consumers are kind of lemmings and they're going to believe what you tell them, and we see a lot of that in the
tech world today, you know, and they find out the hard way. But the confidence goes a long way, so they'll follow you if and you can only tell like 1 or 2 stories like a season or a year. If you get trying to tell too many stories, consumers get confused and they're on to the next thing. So 1 strong story. 3, just do it. I mean, it's just like, I mean, it's a doing culture, right? And it's like if you get stuck around strategizing and talking too much, even at Nike, like a very visual, design-centric company, until you put something physical, right or wrong, on the table, you can't get to the next step. So you can tear it apart, or maybe it's the right thing, or you build on it, but you have to put something physical and tangible on the table. It could be digital too, but something that people can use. If you sit around and talk about it forever, it's just paper, right? So.
If I may ask a follow-up question on what you mentioned in the speech, you talk to what you mentioned now.
Say it again, sorry.
No, in the talk, in the fireside chat, you said that design is very important. People startups don't realize that until they downstage.
Mm-hmm.
But then just like you mentioned, just do it rather than wait for all things to fall in place. Isn't that a little contradiction?
Yeah, I mean, there's this kind of what is like the process of iterating quickly, but I mean, design should not be something that they should be at the founding level, like, because they're great at connecting the dots, and they should be iterating with you on that, and nobody better than a designer to, make things tangible that is, are being considered. I mean, it's easy, really. I mean, we'll do things in like, I hate to minimize what we do, but it's like, how do you, there's this old story about Arnold Wasserman, who was a kind of an old school IDEO guy who's, kind of this legend in design thinking. I just remember the story he told when I first came to IDEO, and he was like, McDonnell Douglas or one of these jet engine companies called him and said, we got a problem, we're off production with this big jet engine, and he walked inside the cowling and was studying it for a while, and draws an X and saying, your problem's here. And he left, and he sent him a bill, and they went on and they fixed it, got it back in production and running, and I sent him a bill for $100,000, and they were like, what? You just drew an X. And he's like, oh, let me revise that. And he's like, drawing the X, $1, knowing where to draw the X, $99,999. So you've heard different things but I mean, if you hire the right designer, they're going to add incredible value very quickly, and they aren't going to mess around with all the mistakes that, and there's nothing wrong with mistakes, but they're kind of educated mistakes and risks. I think even we are trying to figure out how to be, even though we started off super nimble, like we're trying to figure out how we can do these sprints, because we can add an incredible amount of value even in a day, right? And it's better than not using anything at all, right? So I think, but yeah, there's adaptation to the digital side. Hardware is inherently longer, right? But there's so many technologies now with 3D printing. We got 3D printers, laser cutters, desktop CNCs, where you can get real very quick. And we encourage we get into 3D very quickly because sketches lie. I mean, as good as sketches are, sketches lie. You got to get real very quickly. And what's great about these rapid prototyping things, you used to be always so careful. Like, I don't want to release for this model until I get it perfectly right because it costs like $5,000 to make this prototype. Well, now you iterate and build on it, but you also come up with these happy accidents like, oh, I didn't think of that. Or maybe it's not relevant here, but I can save and put it on the shelf for a different project later, right? So that kind of discovery doesn't happen without that iteration and using that rapid prototyping. So. Yep, right here.
How did you go about finding business immediately after you started? What was your first call?
I didn't. Social media didn't exist, did it? Maybe. No, not really. The iPhone just launched, so not really. It was locked. It was not really.
Facebook was like 2008, so yeah, no.
Yeah. It was so funny because I was so down. I was like, and my wife was like, "What's wrong with you and your funk?" And she actually gave me this cheesy ass book called The Secret, and I was like, "I'm not gonna read this." And then I was like, "Fine, I'll read it." It was like it took me like an hour, and I was like, "Well, you know what? this thing is, yeah, I used to always visualize what I wanted and it happened. Like it just was like, as a designer, you are a visualizer, right?
Yeah.
And you actually, it's a dopamine kind of release when you actually see things become real. I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna, think about what I want to do, and then calls start coming in. It sounds weird, but it's all serendipity.
Yeah,
and like, I think I probably told one person and just kind of like, went around the network, however, whatever the network was back then, email or like, I'm out on my own, and I started doing. I think the first job I did was I got back from. It wasn't the Ray Riley or the Microsoft project. It was Logitech, and I ended up. My friend needed help, and he was doing a project for them, and I was on vacation. When I came back, I had one night to deliver something, and I modeled up some multimedia speakers for Logitech that would go into like Walmart or Costco, and they picked it. And out of all the concepts, and the next week I was going to China. I was there for a week or two looking at a bunch of suppliers. We picked one, and then it was on the shelf within 3 months, which is incredibly fast.
Wow.
And then literally, like I think last year I was over there, and they're still running that speaker. This was like 2007 to now, and I think it finally discontinued. But it was like a budget 5.1 multimedia speaker, but it was kind of funny. But that one paid like paid mortgage.
Right.
Month one until the Microsoft thing, or the Microsoft thing came through. But yeah, it was a network thing. It was like literally like I worked with a bunch of people, worked my ass off, and people wanted to work with me, right? And so that network is, if you're coming out and nobody knows you or nobody knows the work you've done, then maybe a little harder. But if you show passion, and I think that's what's show passion and be knowledgeable and curious and work hard, I think it's okay. I was teaching a class at UIC when I was starting MNML. I was like starting a class down there and starting a firm and not spending any time with my family. Like I took on twice as many students, 40 students, and I was really disappointed because like only 3 people in the class actually cared. It seemed like everybody always had excuses about stuff. And I'm like, man, this sucks. I was like, and I'd mention designers or this or that, and they wouldn't know. I'm like, how do you not know? I mean, we have the internet now. Like when I was in school, I knew, but I had to look at books and magazines, and I was like, God, don't be lazy, And I just figured that I couldn't sustain doing a class and starting a firm, so I stopped that. But then the Kickstarter thing made me realize I could reach tens of thousands of people that I actually care.
Yeah.
So you could, that's why I was like, wow, there's got to be this online education thing that's going to explode. And now Linda and all that,
Oh my God.
I started Linda back when it was like hardly anything using it, and then now it's massive.
Huge.
Yeah. But
$1 billion
on your own time, and
Yeah.
you're passionate about it, and you select your own path. That's pretty interesting. So.
Yeah, very cool. Let's do one more. There.
It seems like product life cycles are getting shorter and shorter in this kind of consumer world we live in. How do you balance, designing like a really good product that's going to resonate with customers for a long period of time, and that kind of shorter lifespan and products in general? How does that? What are your views on that?
Yeah, I mean we seem to have a sweet spot for understanding technology and connecting dots, but at the same time, it's a frustration of mine too. Like the fact that some of the stuff we design, we work on it for 6 months or longer, and then it's only relevant for a week before something great, better comes out. It's super frustrating. I don't know what the solution is to that. We're constantly thinking about it. Just-in-time manufacturing, and there's that, but then there's also building up all this inventory, and then there's all these like extra inventory liquidation, inventory hangovers that happen, and all that's just waste, right? So how do you better predict? That's why I like the kind of just-in-time, direct-to-consumer, crowdfunding thing, because you can kind of better gauge what the interest is. It's a little bit more responsible, but I think going to, I don't know what the solution is, but I think this kind of rapid, rapid prototyping moving to production will eventually happen. So just in time and only making what is necessary, but it doesn't mean that the technology won't update very quickly. So I don't know until the point where technology is so powerful and so small that maybe there's longevity to it and it's all software. upgradable. I don't know, but that definitely inspires us to work on more stuff that lasts, like furniture that lasts like 10 to 20 years or more. But then how many new chairs do you need? So it's definitely, it bothers me. But we're creators and craftsmen of making objects, so it's an addiction too. So it's trying to be. We're actually, personally, I'm more interested now in more medical, and we've got a number of medical stuff, much of which we can't talk about, but some stuff that's out that whether it's killing hospital-acquired infections in hospitals, which kill more people than lead to cancers every year, but nobody's talking about it. So we've got a company that we incubated and all the way through to launch, and they're doing fairly well as a small startup out of Naperville. We've got a woman out of Minneapolis that we helped her go from an algorithm and a stethoscope to a device that can basically quantify any kind of blockage you have in your heart or in your arteries and tell you you have an 80% blockage or 20% blockage. And it's non-invasive, and it's a hell of a lot better alternative than put you in a room with a radioactive dye in your blood and lead-lined room with an isotope that they shipped in from a nuclear plant. So that's like kind of that hasn't changed since the 60s. So those type of things are more meaningful, and like there's so many design firms focused on high-tech stuff, whereas there's such open, fertile ground to make a meaningful difference on the med tech area. So, and it has to, because healthcare is out of control, and they have to put some of this testing and screening down into the consumer's hands.
That's awesome. All right, why don't we give it up for Scott Wilson.